Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Dan Collins in Shanghai to talk about the China Money Report. Dan, welcome back.
Hey, Max. Thanks. Good to be back.
All right. So first, I suppose we must start with the assassination of Kim Jong-nam, the older brother of the ruler of North Korea. What is the response in China?
Man, yeah, that's some crazy video that came up. I'm going to be watching out for women with washcloths in the airports from now on. Basically, China has so Kim Jong-nam was China's guy. He's kind of been living in Macau, has a son in Beijing, has another son in Macau, has like 6 different kids scattered around. But basically, this guy has been in China's pocket as a potential replacement if anything goes real bad in the north. And that's maybe why Kim Jong-un has been trying to assassinate the guy here. Like, this is a third attempt. First one was in Hungary and then one in Singapore. But so China's now stopped importing North Korean coal. I mean, North Korea, the economy itself is a vassal of China. It's completely dependent on China, and it's basically lived through sanctions because of China. So they could be up for some additional economic pain here coming up right now.
Right, so 85% of North Korea's exports are to China. Of that is 50% of that is coal. So they've halted the imports of coal from North Korea as a response to this assassination. So it sounds pretty dire. I mean, the North Korean economy is pretty fragile. This sounds like it's going to get even more precarious there. Where is this going?
The North Koreans, it's hard to explain. I have a little bit of experience with them. I studied with a lot of North Koreans at Tsinghua University here a couple decades ago up in Beijing, and these guys were afraid to talk to Americans. But these guys are kind of like, there's thousands of them that studied here, and they're kind of China's guys that are back now in North Korea. And what's going to happen eventually is, it's most of these cult dynasties barely last more than the third generation. So my personal expectation is we'll see regime change in the North at some point, maybe the next 5 years. But North Korea I've been on the border there. I've seen it. I've seen North Koreans. I've been on the Yalu River there. You could basically swim across from city of Dandong, which is Liaoning province here. But it's a dire place. I think it's hard for people to imagine the kind of hell that the average North Korean lives in. Right.
Well, you mentioned regime change there. This, of course, is nuclear weapon wielding country that has a stated hatred of the United States, South Korea. So it sounds completely unstable. I mean, I would think this would gain more attention in political circles here in Washington, D.C. Why do people ignore it?
Yeah, I think with so much focused on Middle East and domestic economy, I think they do ignore it. If you're over here in Asia, obviously it's the number one thing with Japan and South Korea and China. It's a big thing too. China gets a lot of refugees coming over from North Korea. I mean, people risk their lives to get into China, even in the middle of winter to cross over on the ice. But for China, it's a geopolitical blocking state. They're not going to let it go. We probably won't see reunification, but you'll just see it continue to be propped up by China. And it's going to be basically it's all in China's hands. What happens in the north? And I don't think they'll let things get too bad. But absolutely, as you mentioned, it is a rogue state with nuclear weapons. Something we really need to watch out for.
So now Donald Trump wants to maybe start a trade war with China. How's that going to work out, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's the meme going on around the mainstream media with Trump wanting to start a trade war. I would tell the media and people back home in the States that there's already been a trade war and you lost. You lost 70,000 factories in a decade plus. I mean, go to Detroit, go to Flint, go to the empty steel towns, go around the Rust Belt, go around the Southeast. I mean, these are the types of places I think a lot of people in Washington, D.C. and New York City don't get out to, and I don't think they understand it. These economies over here in Asia, Japan, Korea, they're mercantilist economies. They're going to game the trade system. I mean, you can't possibly argue anymore that we live in free markets. I mean, Japanese government owns 30% of their stock market and most of their government debt now. They won't buy cars from Korea. Korea won't buy cars from Japan. Here over in China, okay, China is at least lets us play in the game. But, you can't set up a car company here. You have to pay 50% to a local partner. Even Walt Disney World, they only own 43% of Shanghai Disney. The rest is owned by Chinese government companies. So you don't get into these markets without some kind of joint venture. So all these markets are not free trade. Free trade doesn't exist. It's kind of a joke with these academics running around with their textbooks talking about free trade. And free trade is good, and it is good for countries to specialize in stuff. But the U.S. has, because they have the reserve currency, they've been gamed for decades with people smashing their currencies down against the dollar and with unfair trade practices. And so we get to the point where we are now where the U.S. can't make anything for themselves. They only produce half the vehicles that are sold in the country. They can't make a phone. They can't make a television. They can't make a washer and dryer. And we get to this point where we're basically living in a financialized welfare state. If you're close to the printed money in Washington, D.C., in New York City, and in California, you're okay. If you're anywhere else, you've had a rough couple decades.
Right, financial welfare. So, yeah, I don't think people understand that when Bill Clinton opened up China, they became part of the WTO, the World Trade Organization. Then the U.S. then went on a money printing spree. They've printed more than $20 trillion since then. They've got almost $20 trillion in debt. They've got a financialized economy that trades $5 to $6 trillion a day in Forex. And this made the money printers on Wall Street and the people living near there who are in line to get that free money extraordinarily wealthy. The number of billionaires has gone up almost exponentially. But because labor was routed through China, nobody who was not a lawyer or an investment banker was left out. They then voted for Trump. Hillary refuses to point out the obviousness of this fact and blames other countries for her ineptitude. And now Trump is talking about a trade war. But as you point out, there's been a trade war going on for decades now. How does he address this problem, or does he really understand the problem, Dan? And is there really anything he can do to rebalance this global trade picture?
Well, I think he understands it. I think he understands it at a very basic level, and he's got a lot of guys around him that have suffered greatly from unfair trade. Guys like in steel industry, the steel industry here. They have cities here that make more steel than the entire United States. They make more steel in China in 6 weeks than the United States makes all year. So, I mean, we basically lost our steel industry. I mean, it's barely been hanging on. So does Donald Trump understand it? Yeah. Do you have to be very careful with trade? Absolutely, because we all exist in this. We're like the Soviet Union, right? We can no longer make anything. Our economy is close to collapse. And if we turn too quickly, the whole thing could just fall down like a house of cards. So my advice to him or to any economic policy planners, we need to do this step by step. Do we need to do we need to make $2, $3 items in the United States? No. But why is it that we can't basically produce anything, including high-tech goods? If you look at our imports and exports in the United States, we look like a 19th century economy. We export soybeans and scrap steel and scrap paper, and we import computers and solar panels and vehicles and all this other kind of stuff. So, so I think he understands it. It's going to be a very delicate. He's inherited a Ponzi scheme, basically, in the United States economy. And with the taxes, it's going to be a great start. If you can get the corporate tax rate down from the second highest in the world at 38% down to something 15 to 20%, you're going to see a jobs boom in the United States. In fact, everyone I talk to in China, they're all talking about bringing manufacturing to the United States because they realize they're going to have to do that or they're going to get taxed on it.
They make an interesting point there that the U.S. has become like a third world country in that they export the raw materials, and then the high-end value-added manufacturing happens in places like China. There used to be a characterization of the first world countries that would be the opposite case. They would import the raw materials. If you look at Britain during the Industrial Revolution, they imported cotton from America, and they produced high-end textiles or high-end Wedgwood or other famous, British manufactured goods of that era as the Industrial Revolution. But now we're at a point, as you've just articulated, where the U.S. has become really a third world country in that they're importing the high-end stuff from China. And, to your point that you just made there, I think it's also quite important. I think you need to repeat it, Dan. Tell the people again what you just said. It's so important.
We've been in a trade war and you lost. So now is the time. And now is the time that something has to change. We can't continue on. As Max said, we're 20 trillion in debt. We'll be 30 trillion in the next 5-6 years. If you do a gap-adjusted assessment on U.S. economy, we're trillions of dollars in debt every year. We continue to run $500 trade deficits. We have trade deficits with 90 different countries. So if free trade doesn't exist, it's not in real application of the market. It doesn't exist. People have, especially East Asia, have closed their markets down to the United States. They only buy what they absolutely have to buy from you. And if you want jobs in your country, you need to get behind the president, start to look at maybe a small border tax, and try to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States.
Right. Well, look at countries like Russia for a second, a bit of a digression. They've been buying gold quite aggressively. If you look at the minimum wage in America in the 70s and what you could buy at gold at that time, if you adjusted for the price of gold, what it's done since then, the minimum wage in America would be $64 an hour, not what it is today, $5 or $6 or $7 an hour. And so this just never took root. There's never been an adjustment in America to reflect the fact that the global economy has gone up. Now, China, of course, is $1 trillion in reserves that they've blown through to try to manage this Ponzi scheme. They're going through reserves pretty quickly, Dan. What happens when they just run out of reserves, Dan?
Yeah, they're down to $3 trillion, as you said. We've gone through $1 trillion in slightly over a year, which is an astronomical number. Now, they built up most of that $4 trillion in about 4 or 5 years, went through $1 trillion in a year. China made the mistake of keeping their currency too low for too long. I was arguing 4 or 5 years ago, you need to let the renminbi appreciate to a natural level. It would have probably went down to 5 or 6. And then now as you get the economy has weakened and it can go down, they could just let it go down slower. But they're trying to keep it propped up. China has kept, in fact, against most other currencies in the world, the Chinese RMB is up very much against everybody else, especially against emerging economies, Turkish lira, Brazilian real. I mean, these currencies have collapsed, but China's up big against everybody, with the exception of the dollar's down 8%. Now, to keep the Chinese RMB up there, as you said, they've been going through the currency reserves. A lot of that, though, a lot of the outbound M&A in China that people hear about, the currency flight, so to speak, there's actually hidden strength there. I mean, China, 2015, $100 billion outbound foreign direct investment. Last year, $200 billion, so doubled. This year, it could go up to $300 billion. Chinese state-owned companies are being given money by the government to go out and buy assets, technology, energy in Europe, in the United States. Your European viewers will know it. Look how many football teams have been bought in Europe. 8, 9 of them. Aston Villa. I mean, the list goes on. There's a bunch of them. But all this money's coming out of China to buy up assets, because you can't run trade deficits for 2, 3, 4 decades. That money eventually comes back, buys up your assets, and turns you into a sharecropper in your own country. And that's the next phase for the American citizen, is to become a sharecropper.
Yeah, that's right. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton. All right, Dan Collins, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Max.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Dan Collins of the China Money Report. If you want to reach us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.